And the three characteristics of existence, welcome top, are these three characteristics that the Buddha said all compound things have. There's not one thing that you can think of that is created, that is compound, that is formed, that does not have these three characteristics. And I'll give you a little link just for buddhanet.net, talking about these three characteristics. But you might not have heard of these three characteristics. What are these three characteristics before? But I'm sure if you know it, if you know even a little bit about Buddhist doctrine, you've probably heard about what the three characteristics are. The first characteristic is one of the buzzwords for Buddhism. Everybody knows this characteristic. Everybody knows what it is. It's impermanence. So all things are impermanent. Everything that is created is impermanent. Everything that is conditioned, and mine too, without a doubt, mine too. Everything that is conditioned. And when we talk about conditioned, there's only one thing that's not conditioned. At least, to my knowledge of the suttas and what the Buddha taught, there's only one thing that's not conditioned, and that is nibbana or nirvana. That's it. That's why they call it the unconditioned. So everything that we experience with our six senses is impermanent. And what is impermanence? Impermanence is, we always think of, is that everything changes. Nothing stays the same. Now, in our perception of things, we might not be able to see how things change. But the deeper you're able to look, the more subtle you're able to look at your mind and body, you see how everything is in a state of flux. Some teachers like to use the analogy of the river. Right? If you look at a river one day and a river the next day, it might not look different. It's just a river. But you know that the water that's in that river now is not the same water that was there yesterday. It's a constant flow, a constant change, a constant move. And of course, if you were around for thousands of years, you would actually see how the river itself, the way the river meanders through the valleys and the mountains, how that actually changes as well. So sometimes in our short 100-year lifespan, we're not able to see some things change. Like you might look at a mountain. The mountain hasn't changed in 100 years. It's definitely changed. We might not be able to perceive how it's changed, but it's definitely changed. So this is the concept of impermanence, that nothing stays the same. Things are ever changing, and there's really not much we can do about it. It's a fact of life. It is a characteristic of conditioned existence. No matter how we try to fight against that. And of course, our fighting against that is part of the cause of the next characteristic, which is dukkha. Dukkha is probably my favorite Pali word. There might be one or two others that I like better, but dukkha is my favorite, is one of my favorites without a doubt. Dukkha, often translated as suffering, although most teachers today will tell you that suffering is not necessarily a good translation. I do a Basics of Buddhism class here on Sundays, and when we talk about dukkha, I always break out there's a section at Access to Insight when they talk about dukkha, and it's the contemporary definition of dukkha, and it's about a paragraph's worth of words, about 40 different words that define dukkha. And the interesting thing about dukkha is that dukkha, we understand suffering. We understand suffering. Okay, so we know what suffering is, and so that's why when you hear a misquote or a mistranslation saying that the Buddha says that life is suffering, well, then people are like, well, no, life isn't. To them in their own life, life isn't suffering. I mean, yeah, there's bad parts, but then there's also good parts. There's all of these things. So, how can the Buddha can't be right? Because if he says that life is suffering, and the reason. The Buddha did not say life is suffering. The Buddha said that there is dukkha in life. And, of course, part of the practice is coming to experience and understand that dukkha in more refined and precise ways. In the very beginning of our practice, we might be, at the point where we don't, we see, yes, the Buddha talks about the definition of dukkha: pain, suffering, lamentation, grief, despair, union with the displeasing, meaning having to deal with things that we don't like. We have an aversion to something, whether it's a person, a place, a thought, a concept, whatever it is. This event occurs due to causes and conditions. We decide that we do not like it, so we have an aversion to it. And in making that decision is actually causing dukkha. Because the Four Noble Truths, right? The Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is that not that life is suffering, but that there is dukkha. The second noble truth is the cause, right? The cause of dukkha, according to the Buddha, is our clinging, our craving. We like things, we want more of them. We don't like things, we want to run away from them. That is clinging, that is craving. People don't often think about the aversion part of clinging and craving, but it's just as important. And it's something, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago I did a talk just on aversion, because aversion is equally as important to work on than a craving for things that we like. People will talk about lessening their attachments to things, but they don't often think about working on their aversions, working on their fears, facing their fears. Working little by little to lessen that aversion to the things that we dislike. Whether it's the person at work that annoys us, or that we have a perception that they're out to get us, that they're evil. Whether it's just a little spider in your house and you freak out and you kill it, and then the more you practice, the less aversion. You say, oh, it's just a spider, it's just there. And you go from wanting to kill it because of fear to just putting a cup over it and taking it outside or whatever, something like that. So that's an example of a lessening of aversion. Another going back to the person that you dislike at work. So you pass the person you dislike at work or that annoys you. What do you normally do? you got like a scowl on your face, or you try to avoid them, you run away from them somehow, you choose a different path so that you don't salt in the coffee. So the way you work on lessening that aversion is, how would you do it? When you see him, instead of the scowl, smile. And of course, it's going to be hard at first. You might not be able to do it. You might have to try many, many times. But this is lessening of aversion. I'm kind of getting a little bit off topic. Not necessarily. It's all connected. But so aversion is very important. And so, going back to the definition of dukkha, of course, the Buddha says union with the displeasing, so that aversion. Separation from the loved is dukkha also. So we're talking about, we like things, we like people, places, thoughts. We want them, and we can't have them. So we're not happy. So we have dukkha. We have this state of discontentment, this state of displeasure, this state of, one of my favorite definitions for dukkha is unsatisfactoriness. Because I think if you're going to pick one word, I think unsatisfactoriness makes the most sense. It's really not best for you to pick one word. Are you allowed to grieve? That's an interesting one. Ajahn Brahm says there's no grieving in Buddhism. But you kind of have to understand what he means. Grief is dealing with the loss of an attachment, right? You have an attachment to this person. It doesn't even have to be a person. It could be anything. It could be your favorite sports car, right? You have an attachment to this sports car, this person. One day, they're in your life. The next day, they're not. Maybe your spouse died, or your mother or your father died, and you've had this attachment to them your whole life. And of course, when that attachment is broken, when that person is no longer there, then that's where you feel that void, you feel that sadness, that you're not going to be able to speak to them again, and all of these things. And from that comes, like Luke said, is part of or exponentially said, part of that healing process. Now, the further you get along into the practice, and it's something that you don't necessarily need to. People can own it. People can create a persona over it, and that's a dangerous thing. I have a personal experience with that. Just about 8 years ago, my wife died of cancer, so I know a little bit about loss and grief and all of that kind of stuff. And it was one of those things that I saw, in the movies, silly movies and stuff like that, when you see people die, right, like their spouse died, or what do the people do in the movies, right? They crawl into the fetal position and stay in bed for 3 months and all of this stuff, and it's so dramatic and so drawn out and all of these silly things. And, I knew for myself, and I wasn't a Buddhist back then, actually. I mean, I had started meditating and stuff, but I've always had Buddhist worldview, Buddhist mindset on things. So death has never been something that I have negative feelings about. Now, of course, when my wife died, did I grieve? Yeah, in my own way, I grieved. There wasn't, a lot of what people would normally consider grief, because I think like I said, I take death a little bit better, a little different than most people. I grew up I have experienced a lot of death in my life. A lot. I think by the time I was 20, I had probably been to 13 or 14 funerals, starting with my grandfather at age 10. So, there's nothing to see. This is the thing. There's nothing to be sad about for that. Yes, did I have loss? I mean, my parents are still here. My sisters are still here. So, the closest loss that I've had is my wife, of course. But, watching my grandparents go through cancer and all these things. And as years goes on, you go to a lot of funerals, and I never felt that the way people handle death and the way things went at funerals, it never felt quite right to me, right? It never, everybody's, especially like in various cultures, like European cultures, they have these people called the wailers, right? At funerals, they have to like scream and moan and pull out their hair and do all of these kind of things. And I thought, that's not really like how it works. And I remember being a teenager, hearing about like the Irish culture. They prop up the corpse and give them a beer or whatever, something like that. And I thought, that's a good way of doing things. It's a celebration of somebody's life, right? It's not So, but when people go to funerals, funerals are not for the dead person. Funerals are for the living. Funerals are for people to be able to say goodbye and to help with the process, the grieving process, the process of dealing with loss of an attachment to somebody. Ajahn Brahm, who's one of my favorite monks, he talks about his father died when he was 16, and he experienced some deaths as well. And he talks about how he always thought that life is like a concert, right? When the concert's over, you don't cry because you're sad. So the person's life is like a beautiful concert. When the concert is over, you're happy that you were able to be there to experience that concert. So it's a mindset, and this actually goes into the aversion and into dukkha itself. Are you sad because of the loss of the person, or are you happy because of all the time that you were able to have with that person in your life? Which way do you want to take it? Then you have dukkha. As simple as that, right? When we have the dukkha comes from us taking what happens in life, the impermanence of life, and putting our value system on it. What we like, what we don't like, right? So we have these people we don't like. Well, why are they living till 90 years old when these good people, they died at 25 or 10 or whatever? Why are these good people dying? Who did they ever bother? And they're dead. And these bad people, they're still alive. Nobody's taking them out. What's this karma thing? These people keep living. So when you don't accept the world for as it is, that is dukkha, that is suffering. You are adding your own judgment onto reality. In effect, trying to create your own reality. But your reality is fiction. Right? Politicians should do this, should be like this. The world should be like this. I can't believe that there's this injustice in the world, right? That is dukkha. Ajahn Brahm says dukkha is asking from the world what it can never give you. And I love that quote, because to me, that's as best as you can describe dukkha. Asking from the world what it can never give you. right? So because everything is impermanent, everything is unchanging, and as Ajahn Chah would say, everything is uncertain. Nothing in life is certain, except for death. That's it. People say taxes are certain, but it depends. There's certain situations in certain places you might not have to pay taxes. You could live in the woods or whatever, but no matter what, death is certain. We don't know anybody yet who's lived forever. Maybe, if Highlanders or some kind of immortal beings are real, we don't know. We don't know. But, nobody has lived forever as far as we know. So death is always certain. And even that, think about all the things that we don't like. We don't like aging. We want to hide our age, color our hair, have whatever, facelifts and all of these things to try to hide our age, to fool ourselves into not thinking that we're going to be dead soon. And yeah, soon could be 30 years, but in a human life, 90 years goes by really quick. I'm 36 now. Yeah, 36. And a year goes by so fast, it's unbelievable. I can't imagine how fast a year goes by when I'm 60. Our lives are such a blink of an eye in cosmic time. A blink of an eye. The universe has been around for something like 13.8 billion years. Humans have only been around for a couple 100,000. And we live 100 years. Maybe a little bit more if we're lucky, and we can be on the daytime TV. So, the second characteristic is that dukkha. It's that the reality that we create for ourselves, because we can't see the world for how it really is, and we don't accept it. Well, yes, they say when it comes to rebirth or rebecoming, there is that stream of consciousness that is moving from body to body, and you might say that, yeah, it's thousands and thousands of years old, but even that is always changing, right? So, could you say that you're the same person you were 20 years ago? No, right? Are you going to be the same person in the next life? It's always changing. Always, always, always changing. So, yeah, something might go forward, but it's not going to be the same person. It's not going to be the same thing. There might be characteristics, but, but even that, no matter how long, if that exists, and no matter how long it's been transmigrating in samsara, going from birth to birth, it's always different. It's not the same as it was. And if it was always the same, right? How could we progress to nibbana, to nirvana? If it was always the same, we would never be able to do that. It's just because it's not the same that we can, in this lifetime, or if you believe in rebirth from lifetime to lifetime, progress through the stages. They say the Buddha perfected his wisdom through many lifetimes till the final birth. So just because it is uncertain, because things do change, you can do this. You can achieve this feat and rid dukkha from your life forever. So dukkha, that's the second one. The third characteristic of existence is very hard to see, very hard to understand. But it's so key in the actual teaching and the actual understanding, and that's the idea of anatta, not self. The different traditions talk about not self differently a little bit. But what we have, there you go. That's not self right there. The 5 khandas, the 5 elements. This is the body, this is the mind. There is nothing else. There is no me. There is no myself. There is no mine. It is conditions that come into conditions from causes and moves on forever. Well, until we can end that. So we're talking about not self. And it's very hard to see. People can try to intellectualize it, and it just doesn't work. You know, I never claimed to be a master or guru, somebody has very high attainments or anything like that. So I can only speak very little about what is anatta. I can speak to my own experiences as to what I have. The analogy I've come up with, anatta, not self, is this is the analogy I've come up with. You know you ever see an iceberg, like in videos, you see an iceberg, and you know that like 75% of the iceberg is actually underwater. So icebergs are gigantic. Icebergs are huge. And so anatta, not self, to me is like you have a little ice pick and a little hammer, and you're just chipping away at the little iceberg, and that's how big it is. So right now I feel like I've chipped away a good amount of little ice chips on anatta. I've started on the path of understanding it, but I'm not quite there yet. There's a long way to go. So, but when you start to detach from your ego, when you start to see that the ego is not you, the ego becomes like the best television show ever. It is so funny what the ego does, what the ego says, and what the ego wants you to do. Sometimes you can just, when you get to the point where you start to be able to observe your thoughts and your ego as they come up, it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. I remember I was at a retreat. No, I don't know if anyone here knows. I'm actually going into the monastery probably around November-ish to begin the process of becoming a monk, hopefully, in the Theravada tradition. But I go to a monastery, a forest monastery, pretty often. And, I went to the monastery for a metta retreat, metta being developing friendliness for all beings and all of these things. So I was at this metta retreat. So it's a very peaceful, very developing. The word used, the translation used mostly is loving kindness, but it's really a bad translation, and it doesn't kind of fit with. It doesn't really fit with the reality, the real truth of metta. But so loving kindness, metta. Some people call it loving friendliness. Friendliness is a better translation. And a secular Buddhist scholar who I like, I like his translation of boundless friendliness, because that's what you're trying to develop. This feeling of friendliness for all beings, all existences in the universe. So you're in this peaceful, you're developing these feelings and all these things, and one of my favorite monks was leading it, and he was doing guided meditation, and for some reason I get agitated with guided meditations. I don't know why. There's few things in life that agitate me, but but guided meditations for some reason agitate me. It's interesting. So I was doing the metta, and then I started to observe my mind get more agitated, and then in my ego put this image in my head of me getting up and punching out the monk. I have literally never punched out anybody in my life, but my mind, my ego had this vision of literally of me punching out this monk. That's how that's how agitated my ego got. And it was just, the funny thing about it is, like, right, if I was not at the point where I was at, what would you do for something like that? If you had the vision of punching out a monk and you weren't able to detach from that and to see that it's not me, it's not mine, it's not myself, it's these causes and conditions that occur. People would be like, oh, they would feel guilty, and they would feel horrible, and they would be negative on themselves, and all of these kind of things. And that's the worst. Being negative on yourself is horrible. That really takes you in the opposite direction, because that's how I was in the very beginning of my practice, my meditation practice, and in the beginning of my Buddhist practice, before I found certain monk teachers like Ajahn Brahm, who teach about being kind to your mind and your body and all of these things. I was very negative on myself, because I would read in the books, this is how meditation is supposed to be done, you do this, is back straight, follow the breath, yada yada yada, and I couldn't do any of that. And I was so frustrated, right? And so that we're going back to dukkha, right? I created my own dukkha because I had the expectation of, well, this is what teachers say in the books, this is what should be done. I can't meet that expectation, so I'm angry at myself, so therefore I just created dukkha. I created my own suffering, didn't I? And now, when I was able to get to the point where I was kind to myself, I was kind to my mind and body, and I took things slowly, and I just started to let go and not to worry about and not to be negative, then my practice started skyrocketing, and it started getting better and better, and I started to find more peace. So that is what part of what that's why these three things are connected, right? It's not letting go of a being. Is that not some idea? Well, according to the Buddhist doctrine, what we're doing is we are creating. It's almost like logging onto Second Life, right? We're literally creating this persona. We are creating. This is who I am. I am Joe. That's my English name. That was my born name. I was given the Pali name Jayantha when I took the 8 lifetime precepts. So now I am Jayantha. I am this person. This is what I like. This is what I do. So you create all of these layers of self that build up the ego, and so it's literally like, okay, well, this is my second life avatar. This is my real life. This is my first life avatar. I'm Joe, and this is my second life avatar. And so it's really very similar in the way this is how it's built up. But when you look at it, where is Joe? Where is Jayantha? Is Jayantha in your body? Is your Jayantha? So where is your mind? What is your mind? So that's part of the practice. When you start to see deeper and deeper, and you start to question, well, what is going on here? What is this thing? And when things come into your mind, there are some people. My job for the last many years was Child Protective Services. I dealt with people who had mental illness and who were on drugs, very angry people, and people who did things like domestic violence, all of these kind of things. They are so carried away with the anger that they have no control. Right? We know that they can develop that control, but they have when the emotions hit them, it is like they are on autopilot. And we live on autopilot, all of us. We live on autopilot. It's when we start to meditate and to practice, that's when we start to see these characteristics. We start to see deeper into reality instead of creating layers of our own wishes for what reality should be. And so we're creating, like exponentially said, what are we? The Buddha says we're this. We are form, which is the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations being things created by the mind, thoughts and etc., and consciousness. The Buddha said there is no me, there is no I, there is no self. There is forms, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And even those 5 things, those 5 khandhas, those 5 aggregates that come together to create this me, they are just made of the elements that exponentially said: earth, wind, water, fire. Modern times we add, the periodic table and all these things that were made of, but it's the same thing. Back then in the Buddhist time, they didn't have argon and all of these different elements. It was earth, wind, water, fire. So this is what, so basically what it's saying is that there is no self. And of course, when you say that to somebody, or not self, things are not self. Buddha didn't say that there's no self. He didn't say that there is no, you do create this self. So technically, it sort of does exist. Technically a self does exist. He's not saying that it doesn't. What he's saying is that what you think is this permanent ego entity is not a permanent entity. It is something that is always changing. It is something that is not eternal. And of course, he was teaching in a time in India with the Vedas, which eventually turned into turned into Hinduism is not really the best. That's not exactly the case, but it has that same kind of history. So you're dealing with the Atman, the everlasting eternal soul in that tradition, where Atta, right? Anatta, meaning no, there is no everlasting eternal soul. There is not self. So technically, yes, there is a self. We create this self. But it's not this permanent self that exists outside of our own creation. And so when you think about that, if you try to think about that intellectually, you're not gonna get anywhere, because it's like it's the self thinking about the self, right? So this is why this teaching is to be experienced. Well, you come to understand that that's the nature of things, and so therefore you don't try to fight against it, and you drop your dukkha, you drop your suffering, because you don't fight against the nature. So that is, the Buddha is saying that all these conditioned things, everything that is form, feeling, perception, mental formation, consciousness, everything that is conditioned by these factors has these 3 characteristics: that they are impermanent, ever changing, never the same, they don't last forever, Even the universe itself will not last forever. Trillions of years from now, every star in every galaxy, so we're talking about the universe having 100 to 400 billion galaxies, and each galaxy having 100 to 400 billion stars. So all of these stars and all of the planets around these stars, eventually they'll go dark. There will be no more light left. The universe will be a cold, black nothing. Even the universe itself will eventually die. It came into being. It will die. That is the nature, right? Well, the scientists talk about a multiverse, right? The scientists talk about a multiverse where there are innumerable amounts of universes. Universes collide with each other and create new universes. Universes die and create so there's this ever ongoing, according to string theorists and astrophysicists and stuff like that, that there is, yes, it is speculative physics. Definitely true. Very true. But this is what they're speculating, that there are these multiverses now. So even, the universe itself, so nothing lasts forever. Everything is impermanent. Everything created, everything that comes into existence through causes and conditions has a beginning, has an end, and it changes. That beginning and end might be a beginning and end. There might be billions and trillions of years between that beginning and end, but it's still a beginning and an end. So it's ever changing. So that's the impermanence. And then you have the dukkha, which is the unsatisfactoriness of life, because we have our attachments and our aversions, because we have the craving to have life be what we want when it's not. So we have that dukkha. And then we have the not self. So when we accept the fact that all things are impermanent, and we don't attach to this ego, and we start to lessen our attachments to that, and we start to see what is behind all these things, then our dukkha goes away. And it's a long process. Either many lifetimes or at least a whole lifetime. I'm still chipping away at that iceberg. It's going to be a long, long time, long practice. But the most important thing is to keep practicing. That's the most important thing. People worry about, does rebirth exist? Does karma exist? Does all this exist? Will I go to the heaven realms when I die? Will I go to the hell realms when I die? People worry about so much stuff, and it doesn't get them anywhere. That's the dukkha. That's the ego talking. The dukkha. These things that come. The people, the wise know to sit and to practice, to observe the in and out of the breath, to observe the goings on of the khandhas, your mind and your body, to observe these things and to see things as they truly are. That is the advice of the wise. It's my advice, but I'm not wise. I'm talking about the really wise people. I'm talking about the arahants and the Buddhas, those who I'm just relaying their advice, and that I try to follow it as well, because I do feel that it's beneficial and it makes sense. So that is the advice of the wise, to practice, to live in the Dhammapada, the thousands. It is better to live one day mindful and alert than 100 years with no mindfulness. So, okay. So unless there's any questions or comments at this point, I've been yapping on for 50 minutes, so usually I try to yap on for only a half hour, and then we talk and we have questions. And whenever we end, if there's no questions, if there's no comments, then we end. Okay, friends? Well, until next time, Sukhi Hantu, which is metta. It means may you be happy. And no punching out monks in your mind. Only my ego does that, right? So, Sukhi Hantu, may you be happy. And may your practice flourish.